And welcome back to Forbes Sports Money. As college football fans may be aware, the BCS, long opposed to changing its traditional bowl system, now supports the implementation of a 4-team playoff system for the 2014 season. While details are still being worked out, like how teams will qualify and where they'll play, what does seem certain is that in 2014 there will be one national champion crowned after 2 postseason games. The implications for this new playoff system will be felt far and wide, and here to help us realize some of these implications is sports lawyer Richard Brand, joining us for our State of Sports discussion brought to you by SAP. Richard, good to have you here. Thanks. Let's talk about why all of a sudden this is coming to fruition. Is it in part or large part because of all these huge TV media rights deals out there?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask. I think some people would say it's because of love of the game. They want to have a championship, an absolute championship playoff games. And then there's the people who would say it's got a little bit to do with the billions of dollars of money going out there. I think I probably tend to think that the second answer is probably a little bit stronger. But I think it's important that we focus on the fact that this isn't a change. It's a larger a dollar amount of money being spent, but media rights have been driving so many things for so many times. Media rights deals, for instance, are the underlying security for all those league-wide financing plans. Media rights is the reason why you're able to pay $2 billion for the Dodgers. It's not just because of seat sales and hot dogs and beer and things like that. Media rights were underlying some of the sales. There was a recent sale of the Golden State Warriors, and immediately after that sale occurred, there was a change in the media rights deal which doubled or tripled the amount of money. So it's always been about the media rights. It's just more about the media rights now because there are numbers out there now that are staggering. There's a $3.6 billion ACC number thrown out there, where you also hear reports that some of the people in the league and the conference, they're not so happy because it's backloaded, they don't get enough at the beginning. So even a $3.6 billion deal, which in my view is a significant amount of money, even deals like that are thought of as we could get more, we could get more. So clearly that's driving everything.
Rich, Fox started broadcasting the BCS in 1998. It was paying an average of $82.5 million a year. And people were shocked when ESPN outbid it for the current deal at an average of $125 million a year. And then people were saying, well, even before the discussion of a possible playoff, they were thinking that rights fee might double on average. If there is a playoff, what could that potentially do to the amount of money to whoever buys it is willing to pay?
It's almost impossible to predict because what we're seeing now is we're almost seeing a bid mentality. You're exactly right. Right now it's a 4-year deal, $125 million a year. Seems like a lot of money. People were saying if we did nothing at all to the BCS system, kept it exactly the way it is, with all of the concerns people have, as you said, it would double. So now you come up with a football playoff. You have it at a different site. You have an absolute champion. What does that do? You have Fox, who absolutely wants to get that. You have ESPN, who has the first rights to negotiate that. You create a bidding mentality. So the answer is it's going to be a lot more money. It's going to be a big number. And in truth, it's almost impossible to predict because I think I was telling you the other day, when you look at some of these deals, you look at the you look at the deal for the Dodgers. If you did a Google search 6 months ago, you would read, my God, that deal could be as much as $1 billion. And people would say, no, it couldn't be $1 billion. Yes, it could. Then they said, well, it could actually go up to $1.4 billion. People said, they're just throwing that number out there to get the numbers up. $2 billion. So the answer is the sky's the limit, and it's going to be a big number.
And you know what? If it was just between, let's say, the next bid, ESPN and Fox, it might be a certain finite number there, but Fox has said it wants to build a national sports network. You now have NBC, which is rebranded Versus as NBC Sports Network. So, I mean, Richard, you look at this, there could be a lot of people that want a piece of this BCS pie, much more so than even just a few years ago.
That's exactly right. Have you ever been to an auction where people walk out of the auction saying, I paid exactly the right amount of money? Right. That's what I wanted to pay. It never works that way because the hand just has to go up. And in this case, if you have 4 or 5 bidders, each with a specifically good reason why they want to have it. ESPN clearly wants to keep it. Fox wants to make a headline. Every single media company wants it. that hand's going to go up and up and up.
How important has the social media aspect of the media rights become? You know, there are reports out there that CBS got $60 million for its digital advertising for March Madness this past year. What could the potential be for the social side, social media side, and what they get for digital devices and so forth do for the bidding of the BCS TV deal?
Well, it's another big chunk of change. It's another large amount of money. The streaming rights, we now don't have to say, gee, I wonder if you can make money in streaming rights, because we just saw in the NCAA tournament that it's just that $50–60 million of streaming rights money is going there. So I think the difference is it's some more money to justify what you're spending. But in the end, you're going to spend very often what you have to spend. And an important point, Mike, is that it's not just how many commercials can I sell to pay for this. It's going to be, do I need to have this? I need to make sure that this network is vibrant. I need to make sure that I have the go-to teams on this network, so everybody else is going to want to buy it. If I'm Time Warner Cable and I have the Lakers, who's going to say, not interested in the Lakers, I don't want the Lakers, so never mind. That's what's going to drive up the bidding. It's not just the, you know, the pluses and the minuses. You make this money, you make that money. It's also you need to have it, and this is going to be a need to have for an awful lot of these companies.
Now, do you think, from a viewer's standpoint, this idea of a playoff system, because I think fans have wanted it for a long time, do you think that that's going to be more attractive, Richard, than, let's say, what they have now, where you can sort of handpick what bowl games you want to watch right now? But this playoff system, will it increase maybe viewership and increase fanship?
Well, you're going to, it doesn't, I think the important thing is it doesn't replace it. It doesn't mean that we're now only going to have 2 games, the 3 games actually, the first round and then the championship round. You're still going to have all these other bowl games. You're still going to have a tremendous amount of selection, but in the end, you're going to be able to have the quote-unquote playoff game that everybody wanted. In reality, is this game that much different than taking the very top, the top-ranked team and having it play the second-ranked team? Maybe, maybe not. But to answer that question, you're going to have to tell me, how are we going to decide who gets to play in this playoffs? Are we going to have an NCAA selection committee type thing? Are we going to have whichever team is ranked the highest? Are we going to have some combination? Is it going to be the conference champions from 2 conferences or 3 conferences? Nobody knows what it's going to be. So in reality, it may not be that different, and you're still going to have a lot of those very top bowls. I don't think anybody thinks we're now going to have 3 bowl games in college football. Maybe in a day, but certainly not over the course of 2 months.
What I'm wondering is, what is this going to do to the payouts to the conferences who get the money? You look at last year's championship game, it was $18 million to each conference. And I'm sitting there going, you know, there's already some talk of actually paying college players. I mean, and they're sitting there going, gee, you know, $18 million, that may double with this new rights fee. Do you think it could lead to such exorbitant payouts for bowl appearances to the conferences that it could ultimately even put more pressure to pay players?
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. I think the pressure to pay players is either going to be there or not be there. It's been there for a while, and I think that's going to be an independent decision. But I do think that the pressure is going to be there to determine what are we going to do with all this money. And the good news for those who are worried that there's too much money, what we're doing is you have to think in terms of the numerator and the denominator. The denominator in the BCS series is usually basically those 10 BCS teams that are in there. Now when you're talking about a playoffs, there's not going to be the automatic qualifiers or anything like that. It's going to be a much larger denominator. So they actually need a lot more money because they have to share a lot more money. Some would say that's perfect, that's more fair. Wouldn't you want to have more teams getting more money? Some would say, well, I'm kind of interested in my team getting more money. And there's going to be a little bit of play on that. It's not exactly clear, because nobody knows how they're going to share the money. Nobody knows what the system's going to be. There are more unanswered questions, and I believe probably by the end of the summer we'll have a much better idea. But right now, what do we know? There's going to be a playoff series. What do we know? It's not likely going to be 8 games. It's not likely going to be 16 games. It's likely going to be 4 games. Where are they going to play? I don't know. How are you going to pick them? I don't know. There's a lot of questions, and I think there's going to be a lot of different answers coming up over the next 2-3 months.
Do you think we're also going to, Richard, continue to see these teams sort of re-examining what conferences they want to be a part of? I mean, we're talking about super conferences now. We're talking about teams that are supposed to have 10 teams now have 12 and 14 teams.
Well, everything is, we've been saying for 5 years, everything's in a state of flux. So if I say that again, now it's really in a state of flux. What's changed? Well, when you look at things, I think a little side note, which I think is kind of funny, the Big Ten has 12 teams, the Big 12 has 10 teams. I don't think it's going to stay like that. Frankly, I think you're going to more likely to see each of them having 14 teams. There's going to be a realignment, and we just had this Champions Bowl announcement right now where you have the Big 12 and the SEC coming up with a Rose Bowl, something similar to the Rose Bowl idea. Some say this is terrific, this is compelling. Some say this is terrible, this is awful. We now have the haves, which are the 4 major conferences, and the have-nots, who are the losers. The ACC, the Big East, what's going to happen there? We've already read that Florida State is at least thinking about the Big 12. And keep in mind, the Big 12, remember that conference? A year ago, it was done, it was over. Texas was leaving, folded up. It's over, done. Now what you have is a Big 12, which is aligned as one of the top 4 conferences. So yeah, the realignment is going to continue. And by the way, what's helping drive that realignment? Oh, that's right. If more than 2 teams change, then you get a change in your media rights deal. It's always going to have some media rights component in it because people have a tendency to like to get paid.
Speaking about getting paid, you're also going to have the Rose Bowl contract expire. That's separate from the 5 BCS games. Those are all in 2014. In your view, are they going to all be bundled into one contract in order to maximize the value of that contract in 2014?
It's an interesting question. Of course, it's just a complete coincidence that they've decided to start the playoff series at exactly the time that the ESPN contract and the Rose Bowl contract expires in 2014. But since we have that simple coincidence, yeah, it's going to get rolled, but it's a good question when you're talking about Rose Bowl. What's going to happen to the Rose Bowl? The Champion Bowl has already said that what they plan to do is they plan to take, if one of their teams makes it to this football playoff, they're going to go to the football player, and the Champion Bowl will be the next best teams. Rose Bowl hasn't said that yet. So then what could you have? Could you have a competition where the Rose Bowl actually has better teams than the playoff? My guess is it's going to have the very best teams are going to go to the playoffs. There's going to be plenty for everybody. And in the end, you're going to see 3 really, really good things. You're going to get the Rose Bowl, the Champions Bowl, and a playoff series, and there'll be enough people watching all of them.
You know why I'm glad we have the show, Michael, is because we get these long chances to explain and understand these things. Can you imagine if we had a Twitter conversation about this? No way you get that in 140 characters or less.
You're absolutely right.
Especially since I barely know how to tweet. It would be a real problem.
All right. Richard, thanks for being with us.
Thanks very much for having me.